Hello everyone, say we have a special treat here up in Alaska with a genuine Alaskan. Would you be considered a sourdough?
Probably by now, yeah.
Yeah, sourdough. He's been up here a long, long time. Wait until you hear how he got here. He almost didn't make it through his first year. Hey everybody, stay tuned. Ron Spomer Outdoors up in Alaska with a real Alaska mountain man. Complete Alaska adventure. And now to our guest, Jerry Jacques. Jerry, welcome to Ron Spomer Outdoors podcast.
Thanks, Ron.
Hey, it's a great treat to have you here. Jerry and I go back a bit because he was a bush pilot who took me on a hunt, gosh, 25 years ago.
25 years ago, I think now.
So we're both a little better looking now. But I just happened to be up at a fish camp and a grizzly bear hunting camp here in Alaska and bumped in. Turns out Jerry's going to fly me back into the tundra one more time.
Yep.
But we have been telling some stories, and I am absolutely fascinated to hear more because, Jerry, you came up here when you were how old?
I think I ran away from home at about 16 and hitchhiked to Alaska. Got caught, got sent back, and then the next year did the same thing and found my grandfather's old trapping cabin that I had a bush pilot drop me off and tried to spend the winter there. I was foolish, young, totally unprepared, and I made it through the winter, but in the spring I was literally starving to death. I had a little bit of green moose meat that I could cut the green off and get to the still edible meat inside, and that was it.
Whoa.
And
And you were 17 at the time?
17.
Hitchhiked to Alaska, dumped off at a cabin, and this is a classic old school small log cabin kind of thing, trapper's cabin.
6 foot by 8 foot, dirt floor, no windows.
What did you bring in for food?
Well, the trapper that was my grandfather's partner had told me the cabin was well supplied, but he hadn't been there for 8 years. So I thought I had a winter's worth of food. I had a big duffel bag and a backpack, everything that we could fit in the Super Cub for the pilot that flew me in, thinking that I had beans and rice and lentils and all kinds of food. Most of it had been either gotten into by porcupines or squirrels or whatever, and very little of it was still there and usable. The only things that was good was what was in either glass containers like mason jars or in a couple of 16-gallon drums that had snap rings to them. And everything else was gone or spoiled.
And you had no way of getting out to get more supplies,
I
contacting
didn't,
anyone?
No. The bush pilot was going to pick me up in the spring when the lake thawed out.
And you didn't make any contingency plans like, hey, maybe check on me in a month or two just to see if I'm still
Again,
breathing?
young and foolish and not knowing what I was doing.
Oh my gosh, this is a cautionary tale. Well, see, this reminds me of that young man not too long ago who went up north out of Healy into that school bus, the infamous school bus.
Yep.
That was a similar situation, only he didn't make it.
He didn't make it. I was really lucky because a young man by the name of Kevin Jensen, an Indian boy from the little village of Pedro Bay, had been out exploring. He was a couple years younger than me, but age 14, 15 was kind of when they start their manhood treks. And he'd taken a boat as far up the Iliamna River as possible and was just out hiking around, exploring his dad's old trapping country, and saw smoke coming from up at the top of the valley. And he decided to walk up and see what was going on. And he found me literally on the verge of starvation. And I think if he hadn't found me, I probably would have died.
Were you pretty much skin and bones?
I weighed 126 pounds.
Wow.
So yeah, I was real skinny.
Yeah.
My clothes were a mess. And we immediately hit it off. I offered to give him some food, and he looked at the green moose meat and wasn't thrilled.
Didn't like his options, huh?
It was late enough in the afternoon that he spent the night in the little cabin with me and then talked me into going to visit his parents and get some good food in us.
Well, I bet that didn't take too much persuading,
No,
did it?
it didn't. So half a day hike down to his boat and then about a 4-hour, 3-hour boat ride over to the little village of Pedro Bay. And we've laughed about it since, but at the time I was just filthy dirty. My clothes were in shambles. And Kevin walks into the house with me right behind him, and his mom and dad were sitting there, and they're just looking at me like, what the heck is this? And Kevin's kind of looking at me and looking at them and realizing this is a little unusual. And he looked at his mom and said, look, Mom, a stray Gussick followed me home. Can we keep him?
You got a sense of humor.
And, Gussick is the word for white man or white person
Gussick.
In the native tongue. And they basically adopted me.
Oh, nice.
Carl Jensen was one of the elders and was actually the last person to deliver U.S. mail officially by dog team.
Nice.
And they taught me everything I needed to know about survival. And as time went on, I realized how foolish I was with what I'd done and how lucky I was.
Yeah.
If Kevin hadn't found me, I would have starved.
Yeah, you would have never got out of there.
No. No, by the time,
How much more time would have had to elapse before your pilot came back for you?
at least another month.
A month. Well, yeah, you could have been gone.
Yeah.
So what did you eat the whole time you were there then? A little bit of food was left over, but mostly you had to shoot a moose?
I shot a moose. I shot a young bull moose, and that was fine through the winter. But by midwinter, I was starting to get scurvy, and I didn't know it. But my teeth were getting loose, and sores in my mouth and throat. And thankfully, I remembered one of my grandfather's old tricks about finding rose hips, which are oftentimes stay on the vine for longer, and high bush cranberries, which do the same thing. And so, thankfully, it was a light snow year, and I could hike down, and I found both rose hips and the high bush cranberries, and started eating those. And within a week or two, I actually started feeling a lot better.
Pretty good. Vitamin C, guys.
Yep.
Take your vitamin C.
Absolutely.
A natural source. This goes way back to the Russian explorer, Captain Vitus Bering. When he came over, he had a German naturalist with him, Steller.
Okay. Yep.
Steller J, Steller
Right.
Sea Eagle, Steller Sea Lion, all these names. Of course, this German was really wanting to get into Alaska, new land, They weren't sure if it was an island or whatever, but, Vitus Bering let him go to shore with a water crew to get fresh water for a couple of hours. And that was it. He'd come all the way across all that time and wanted to explore. But what he found when he got on shore was a scurvy problem on board, and he knew that some of these plants would have some, I don't know if he knew it was vitamin C, but he knew there was something in that plant that would help with that. So he collected a bunch of it, and he brought a bunch of the guys back to life, essentially, and saved them. And if you read the book, several just wrote him off and said, that's nonsense, we're not going to do it. And they died of scurvy. But he saved most of them by forcing them to eat this stuff. So it's nice to know that sort of stuff before you run off to Alaska.
Yeah.
Well, what happened after that? So you got schooled by your new adoptive family?
Yep. And Carl was also a hunting guide. He worked with another guide by the name of Sonny Headland, who had grown up together. And they were in the hunting business. And basically, I fell right into the hunting business, working as a packer and assistant guide. And when Sonny passed away, Pop needed a pilot because Sonny was the pilot. And essentially, Larry Rivers took me under his wing and taught me to fly Super Cubs. And the lessons I learned from Larry is what helped save my life long enough to get to have old and gray hair.
An old, bold pilot from Alaska. So how many years you been flying?
42, I think, 43 years now.
Have you got any harrowing adventure stories from that? I mean, you probably died about 6 times from that.
Yeah, I've wrecked more than my share of airplanes, had an engine failure with Jim Kelly, the pro football player, on board. And Chuck Yeager became one of my good friends and clients. And Chuck also gave me some lessons by telling me I was taking stupid, unnecessary risks and
Really?
chewing me out, which kind of, at the time, really broke my heart because here was my hero, General Chuck Yeager, telling me that I was being an idiot and calm down and this wasn't a war zone. I didn't have to fly like this. Another mentor was a guy by the name of Ron Sutphin, who was a Air America pilot in Vietnam, the Bush pilot. And between Larry and the three of them, they kind of reined me in and taught me that really flying, especially flying the bush, is risk management. And those lessons have enabled me to live long enough to be talking to you again after another 25 years.
Well, tell me some of the crack-ups or the almost bought the farm incidents with flying. What were some of the harrowing experiences you had?
Well, the one with Jim Kelly, We were down on the Aleutians in Cold Bay,
Okay.
and Jim and his brother Pat were hunting with us. Jim had taken a bear and was ready to come home, and I flew in, and the tide was coming in. There was very little beach. I loaded Jim in the Super Cub and told him, you can only bring your sleeping bag and nothing else, because we're very, very short beach. Took off, got about 400 feet in the air, and the engine had catastrophic failure.
Really?
And I had no beach to land on. So I actually had to set it down in the water in the Bering Sea, right as close to shore as I could get. And I wound up yelling to Jim. I said, Jim, we're going down. And so I basically skied the wheels across the water till it got slow enough and I got as close to shore as I could. And then the airplane went all the way up onto its nose, almost flipped, and then thankfully came down upright. I'm opening the door and I yelled to Jim, get out, don't get swept out to sea. And meanwhile, you're going through what you train. I'm shutting my mags off, shutting the electrical system off, shutting the fuel system off, which in the water really didn't matter, but that's how you train, and so automatically going through that. And Jim yelled from the back seat, I can't get it off. I turned around, and he's already up to here in the water, because the Super Cub sits low in the tail, up to about his belly button, and I thought it was his seatbelt stuck. And I'm still in my harness, and I reached back, and I groped him a little harder than anybody should have. And he squeaked, not that, it's the helmet! Because I was grabbing the wrong parts of his anatomy, and about that time, he got the helmet off. And he's too much of a gentleman, or he probably would have said, you idiot, but he didn't. Got the helmet off, and he bailed out. And we were right on the edge of a ledge. And when he first stepped out, it was about waist deep water. And then the next step, it was the ledge, and he went in over his head. And I told him, get to shore, don't get swept out to sea. And he looked like Mart Spitz swimming to shore. I mean, he swam to shore till his elbows touched the ground. Knowing that the ledge was there after watching Jim, I got out. And I knew there was a ledge there, so I'm trying to stay as dry as I can, because we're in the middle of the wilderness.
Sure.
And thought, well, maybe I can save my airplane. And there's a hatch in the back, which I had rope. And so I went to the hatch, and I'm taking my Leatherman tool off and open the hatch to get my rope, thinking maybe we can pull it onto shore and save it. Well, the time it took, Jim thought I was stuck in the airplane.
Oh, no.
And he's on shore, and when he realized that I wasn't right behind him, he turned around and charged back into the Bering Sea in ice cold water, knowing that he was risking his life to try to help and save me. And then when he got there, he saw I was okay, and by that time we hooked the rope to the tail of the airplane and got the rope tied to shore. And his brother and my other guide showed up, and we actually got the airplane.
So they saw you go down.
They saw us go down.
How far away were you from them when you went down then?
Probably half a mile.
Half a mile?
Yeah. And they had run as hard as they could. All they saw is the engine start to make weird noise and then quit, and then we went below their horizon line. So they didn't know if we'd survive the crash or what.
Wow. So now you're all soaking wet, you're middle of nowhere, but you still have a hunting camp with those guys in it, right? So you're in pretty good shape.
We were able to get back to the hunting camp and then use the radio. An airplane happened to fly over a little while later, and we got the radio contact, and Dan Saylor's another old hunting guide who was in the area, came out and picked up Jim and brought Jim back, and the next day brought me another prop and some other supplies, and we got the airplane back running, and following day flew
you
home.
said you had catastrophic engine failure. What had happened?
It was contaminated fuel. 3 of us had all got contaminated fuel. Oh, wow. And it shut 3 engines down. I was the only one that wound up in the drink over it, though.
Now, normally if you got bad fuel like that, does it kind of stutter and gas where you can get going again?
Yeah, and normally you would check your fuel and sump the fuel to check it, but what happened is their filter system hadn't been changed for 6 or 8 months, and they had such high pressure it pushed the water and the fuel through the filter system and turned it into solution.
Oh.
It takes about 20 minutes for it to settle out. And I'd gotten fuel, sumped the fuel tank instantly, and taken off. So that time that I'd taken off is when it had a chance to settle out.
Yeah, normally when you do that, you call it sumping the fuel tank.
Yep.
You press, and if there's any water, it settle down into that spot and it
Exactly.
drains out.
Yep.
Yeah, I always see you guys doing that when I'm up here. That's interesting stuff. Yeah, you've got to keep your organization on this stuff with a plane. You don't just jump in and go like a hop in your car, and if it dies on the highway, so what?
Right.
You don't have necessarily a highway. Wow. Any other great almost bought the farm adventures like that?
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, tell me another one. I love these.
I also did some flying for the State Department and had a couple bullet holes in the bottom of the airplane when we pre-flighted after the next morning flying in Afghanistan. And
You flew in Afghanistan?
yeah, I flew 3 tours of duty over there.
Wow. Jerry, you get around.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've been blessed.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to have a wife that allows me to do the things I want to do and keeps the home front fires burning. And
So you were up here then at 17. You become a hunting guide. You become a pilot. How long after were you out actually leading hunters before you started flying?
I'd probably guided for 3 or 4 years as an assistant guide before I finally started flying.
Then when you started flying, were you mostly used as a pilot rather than a guide, or did you do a little of both?
No, I did a little of both. I had a little whitewater rafting company, and we're doing the photography stuff during the summer and the hunting in the spring and fall. And so I started running my own operations. So with the little old Super Cub, I started flying all my clients in, and I had one guide by the name of Ace Doobie who grew up in a gold mine in Alaska, and he would guide and I would guide, and then I did all the flying for the two of us. And then eventually built the operation like you saw 25 years ago. And about 20 years ago, retired out of the hunting business and just do photography trips now for wildlife photography.
Where do you all go? Pretty much anywhere? Or you stay in this
Katmai
area?
National Park, Lake Clark National Park, McNeil Bear Sanctuary,
Okay.
and all around the Bristol Bay, Iliamna area.
Are you able, I assume you're doing the big bears, as most people are interested in?
Yep.
You fly them out to a hot spot location, and then, what, did they leave them out there camping for a few days? Or
No, we come back to the lodge every night, fly out during the day.
Oh,
And then
comfort.
they've got a guide, and kind of like you and I, camping has gotten harder over the years, and coming home to a hot shower and a warm bed and gourmet food
Something
at night.
to be said for that.
Yep.
You know, after your first 20 or 40 years roughing it, it's kind of nice to evolve into a shower at some point.
Yep.
Jerry, and I'm just remembering when you left me off in the Brooks Range on that hunt that time, at the last second I said something about fish, or you said there's fish in this lake and any fishing rods, and you said, I think I've got one in the back, and you pulled out an old spin cast outfit of some kind. And I can remember there were missing guides on it, so we maybe had 2 guides to hold the line to the rod or whatever. It didn't matter, and you had 2 MEP spinners, as I remember. One was orange, the other one was probably bronze, but they were size 0, tiny little MEP spinners, which is a great size for anywhere, because a big fish will take a little bait, but little ones might not take the big one, and if you need a fish, we'll take anything. We went down to that lake, and it was like stacked cordwood. Grayling, char, lake trout, just stacked up there waiting for something to eat, it seemed like. Every cast we'd catch one. It was so easy that we stopped fishing because it was boring. You knew you were going to catch one on every cast, but for the first dozen or so, it was pretty exciting because it was what every fisherman dreams of, that kind of many stacked up fish. So I think you are responsible for the most char, lake trout, and grayling I ever caught in a short amount of time. I just piled them up. That was fun. So you were flying hunters on. You surely have some hunting near adventures kind of things too. Anything really stand out as some crazy things that happened?
Well, I had a hunter by the name of Marvin Winters from New York who was doing a hunt with one of my guides by the name of Zach Babbitt, and they'd taken a nice bull moose, and on the way back, he lost the bolt out of his rifle.
Ooh.
And a nice big grizzly wound up right between him and where they were trying to get to. And Zach was still taking care of the moose, butchering the moose. And Marvin had a pretty scary time when he went for his Weatherby, and all of a sudden there's no bolt in it. And managed to avoid the bear and got back to the camp. And then several years later, which would have been 1997, Marvin was hunting with me down in Coal Bay, the same valley that Jim Jim Kelly, the football player, was in, and we took the new world record bear, which is still, as far as I know, the all-time #1 SCI bear with the
Really?
31 and 2/8 skull.
So the skull dimension
Width and length was 31 and
yeah,
2/8.
wow. And how big body-wise was that? Everybody always talks about 10-foot bear, 11-foot bear.
It was an honest 11-foot plus bear.
Wow.
It was huge.
Yeah.
It looked like a Volkswagen on the side of the mountain.
Well, bet. So was he pretty far up a mountain?
We were actually on top of a big mountain looking at 2 valleys when we spotted a much smaller bear, and hiked down in, and he was about ready to shoot a 9-foot bear, which is a very respectable bear. And Jason, the guide, saw a much bigger bear and literally picked Marvin up and planted him in the right direction of this bear that had no idea how big it was. It was just the biggest thing that any of us had ever seen.
Yeah.
And the game was on. That bear took a good solid hit from Marvin's first shot, but he was using the wrong ammo. He was using 300 Weatherby, which is a great cartridge, but 180 grain projectiles, and he wasn't getting that much penetration.
Yeah. Do you remember what the bullet was?
I remember it was 180 grain, and I don't remember what, but it was not a core lock. It wasn't a.
It wasn't a premium controlled expansion kind of a bullet.
Better suited for deer or caribou, and
yeah, big mistake.
And so he never got more than about that much penetration.
Whoa, 8-10 inches is all?
Yeah, about that. And it took 14 rounds. and 1 round from a 375 H&H to finally finish it off.
Yay, Wes. How far were you from, you had packed this big thing out. I mean, even just the hide and the skull has got to weigh how much?
I would say Jason packed it out, and I would say that hide with the skull still in the hide, or the skull still inside the hide, was probably 140 pounds. It was amazingly heavy.
Big stuff. Wow. Anybody ever get in fisticuffs with a bear?
I had a black bear get a hold of me a long time ago.
Really?
And ripped my shoulder and my arm up pretty good.
No kidding. How'd that happen?
Human problem. It was at a mining claim that they'd left a caretaker in, and when the owners of the mine had left, he had decided this dog food was kind of cool to watch the black bear come eat. And when it ran out of dog food, the bear started breaking into the cabin. And I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
How did you get involved in that?
We were doing 6-day whitewater rafting trips, and that was our last night camp on the Talkeetna River. And we pulled into camp, and here's this guy that we called Starvin' Marvin with 3 campfires on the beach about 400 yards from the cabin. He said, I've got this demon black bear. It keeps breaking into the cabin and stealing my food, and I'm afraid to go back. And he knew I was a hunting guide and asked if I could maybe come help him take care of the black bear. So I had our camp with our rafters about 400 yards downstream from the cabin, and went in and spent the night. I used some cable and tried to set some snares, which didn't work. I'm not that great of a trapper. And in the middle of the night, the bear literally came through, and the first thing that happened was the cabin was just visqueen plastic wrapped around a bunch of poles. So cabin's kind of an exaggeration, but it was
a plastic cabin.
Yeah, it was a shelter, and I was laying on this handmade bunk, and the bear actually poked its head through right above me on the plastic and was gone.
Whoa.
And I'm like, did I dream that? And I'm looking at it, and Marvin's on the other side of the cabin. And I said, was this hole here when we went to bed? And he said, no, I rewrapped it with visqueen before we went to bed. There were no holes. And I'm looking,
There's one now.
Not good. And then went back to sleep, and about an hour later, same thing. And the bear this time came all the way through, or it's all the way up to its shoulders, literally with its paw on the bunk. And the thing that scared me more than the bear was Marvin, who was going through the DTs and had an Italian-made .44 Magnum. He was trying to get out of the holster shaking, and I was more worried I was going to get shot by him than the bear. I just hit the bear as hard as I could with my fist, and she kind of bellered, and out she went.
Whoa.
And then an hour or so after that, we heard a shot, or Marvin heard a shot, and it was at my camp. And so went down in the camp, and here's this dead black bear right in the middle of the camp. And my guide, raft guide, was standing there with a 870 in his hand, and this dead black bear, and a group of card-carrying Sierra clubbers around. And I'm going, oh, this is bad news for me. And Ed has never let me forget it, Ed Wick. I got right up close to his face and said, Ed, it's not good to kill the wildlife on the hippie trips. Ed, he just said, I've been throwing firewood, I've been throwing rocks, this bear keeps coming into camp. And finally, one of the gals went into the outhouse, and it wouldn't let her out of the outhouse. She said, I had no choice. It was going to hurt somebody. I had to kill it. He's like, yeah, makes sense. And then I'm looking, and the cooler lids are torn off, and the garbage is shredded. The camp looks like a little bomb had hit it.
Oh, my gosh.
And that was like, okay. So I went back to go to sleep in the cabin. And I said, well, I'll skin the bear out at breakfast. You guys cook breakfast. I laid down for an hour or so more sleep. And it wasn't one bear, it was two.
Oh my gosh, it's not over.
No, she stuck her head through again, and as soon as I started moving, I had a 1911, and as soon as my hands started going for the 1911, I had two of those old Kapok heavy sleeping bags over top of me.
Yep.
And she grabbed me through the sleeping bag here, and it broke my radial and ulna and dislocated my shoulder.
Just by biting you through the...
She was trying to pull me out. And finally I got a hold of the 1911 and put the barrel to the side of her head and pulled the trigger, and she let go, and then I emptied the magazine into her.
Days. So now you've got a broken arm.
Yeah.
And you have to, now are you rafting out or flying?
We've still got a one-day raft trip
1 day of rafting
ahead of us. And so Ed strapped my kayak onto his raft. I would run in safety kayak, and loaded me on the raft and rode all of us the rest of the way down to Talkeetna.
Wow. So this is the Talkeetna River above the town site.
Way up.
Talkeetna,
We
way
started
up.
70 miles upriver.
So you go 70 miles up, float down almost
Right.
to town, huh?
Yep, all the way into the town.
See, my wife used to do a lot of kayaking way back when, and she was up in Alaska, but I don't know what river she was on, Alsac or some famous whitewater river.
Yep.
But she would appreciate a story like that. Wow. So you survived. You know, most people are going to think, bush pilot, living all your life up in Alaska and taking people grizzly bear hunting, there would have been an altercation with a grizzly bear that bit you, not a black bear.
Yep, nope, it was a black bear that got me.
Well, the statistics show that black bears kill more people than grizzlies.
Yep.
But it's always been, well, that's because they have a wider distribution, they're much more common, et cetera, which makes sense. But still, I think, and I'm guilty of this myself, you just assume it's just a black bear. You really don't get too worried about them, but we probably should be.
Yeah, I think they can be more aggressive, and they get habituated to people easier, and I think they're a bigger issue than dealing with the grizzlies.
Yeah.
Grizzlies, it seems like they're going to either leave or have a problem, and most times they leave, and the black bears will leave, you can run them off, and then they keep coming back. And that's what happened with those two bears.
Yep. Now, when you have spent this much time in Alaska, Alaska is a big place. What parts of it have you worked in? Cold Bay, you're way down here on the Aleutian chain, on the last piece of ground before it becomes islands hopping, right? So, and then you go north all the way up to Prudhoe Bay. What parts of Alaska have you worked in?
Well, a lot of time in the Brooks Range, which is where you and I hunted together out of my camp. The Talkeetna Mountains and this Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna area, and then also Cold Bay.
Cold Bay.
We were kind
Now,
of all
Cold
over.
Bay is kind of famous for, they've got some really big bears down there. I've seen some massive bears out. What's that, the National Wildlife Refuge on the west side?
Eisenbeck.
Yeah, Eisenberg. There was a bear way out there. It must be pretty shallow because it was like he was just standing there. But his head was like, you talked about a Volkswagen, that head alone looks like a small Volkswagen out there. Just a huge, huge animal. But
And that was the area where the number one bear came from.
That was it, huh?
I had the permit for operating in Eisenbeck.
why does they get so big down there?
They've got Bering Sea and the Pacific Ocean very close together, and they get a 4-month long season that they can eat salmon.
Oh, Do they also eat seafood of any kind, clams?
Yeah, they've got the sedge grass. There's some clams in the area, but the sedge grass as well as the eel grass, and then a lot of marine mammals that can wash up. So they
that's
get
right.
a lot of different opportunities for
Walruses
food.
and seals and stuff, huh? Okay, makes sense. Now, when you were outfitting hunters, did you pretty much hunt all the legal big game? Or did you have areas with, I know we hunted sheep up there, and caribou, I suppose?
Sheep, caribou, and the Arctic grizzly up in the Brooks Range. The Talkeetna Mountains, we hunted Dall sheep, moose primarily, and then grizzly. And then down this area was the brown bear here and in Cold Bay, and caribou also.
In all those years, what have you noticed for changes in wildlife numbers and locations and different things?
Fish and Game has done a great job of managing the bears. I think our bear population is as good or better than it's ever been.
Nice.
Overall, the sheep population has definitely gone down. Without a doubt, the sheep
have, huh?
population has gone down. And I don't know whether it's as much hunting pressure as just weather patterns change, and the sheep population, from my understanding, has always gone up and down. And I think it's at a low right
Just
now.
at a low point now.
And then the caribou here during the 80s and 90s, there was tremendous caribou here. The Mulchatna herd was at its peak.
Famous.
And, we could take lots and lots of caribou hunters. That herd has crashed in the probably early 2000s. And it went from a high of almost 400,000 animals down to about 30,000 animals where it is right now.
Yeah, huge difference.
Yeah.
You think that's cyclical as well? I know Fish and Game is concerned about too many bears and wolves eating them, eating the calves.
I think it's cyclical. I don't think that at least with caribou, I don't think the bears are going to get that many caribou calves. They'll get a few, and the wolves will obviously chase it, but I think it's more cyclical.
What about the moose, though? It's a little more problematic?
Moose is more problematic.
What does a cow moose just have one calf?
Yeah, very
Rarely
rarely will they have two, but
Yeah.
usually just one.
If you lose one calf, you're pretty much done for the year.
Yeah, exactly.
There goes your recruitment. Yeah, I years ago hunted with someone south of here. Can't remember his name right now, but he was talking, this is in the Wood Tick area. And he was talking about this rogue grizzly that was killing adult moose. He said he had just learned how, figured it out, and this thing would track him down and kill him in the early spring when he first came out of the den. There was still deep snow, and the moose were pretty tired and worn down, and they had to try to get through that snow. And this bear would just get up there and kill one and feed on him for a day, and then he'd move off and kill another one whenever he was hungry. And he said he was just wiping out the adult moose.
Yeah.
Does it sound real?
I can believe it.
Yeah.
Bears are a smart animal. They're really smart, and they're obviously the top of the food chain.
Yeah. What kind of intelligence have you seen in them besides the one coming back to stick its head in your tent?
I watched a bear on a moose kill that we'd made follow his nose for 14 miles. I was flying back and forth, and we had the moose kill. I was bringing packers out, and this bear was on this series of ridges with a light wind blowing to it. And first I saw it, I kind of jokingly said, yeah, that bear's going to go to the moose kill. And every flight, it just kept moving. And it went 14 miles in as straight as line as possible and went right to that moose kill.
So your impression was he was smelling the moose kill
14
from
miles
14
away.
miles.
I couldn't believe it.
I guess. I was in BC one time. We were on a high ridge glassing for caribou, and we went to the edge to where you could look down into the valley. Hey, there's a grizz down there. And we looked, oh, look at that, it's a beauty, man. He's the blonde, and it's like, you could see him sniffing the air. And then he kind of looked around and took off. And this is a mile away.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, he almost acted like he smelled us. And the guide said he did smell us.
Yep.
And that impressed me because a mile, but 14 miles?
I was just
Follow
totally
that
blown
scent
away.
trail. Wow. What does that tell you about the olfactory skills of a grizzly bear?
We had another bear right here at this lodge that I've got an incinerator back up in the alders, and it was tearing the door off the incinerator and pulling all the burnt garbage out, and was making a real mess. And my cook and crew were buffaloed by it. Well, when I came back from a flight, I went up in my little Jack Russell dog and threw a couple rocks at it and ran it off. within 2 or 3 days, that bear learned my scent, and it would take off as soon as it smelled me, but it knew it had my crew buffaloed, and it would just stand there and continue to eat and make a mess of it.
Ignored them, but you, it was a...
Yep, because
Wow.
they were afraid of it. And ultimately, the way we cured it is I didn't want my scent on it, but I had my cook take some bacon grease and peanut butter and smear it over a can of bear spray, and we wired it to the door, and that bear bit into that bear spray, and we never saw it again.
So the erupted into his mouth, and
Yep.
he got a dose of pepper.
Yep,
That is pretty cool.
bear never came back.
I have seen bear spray cans with teeth marks in them where we land at various places to hunt and camp and stuff. And you figure, well, those bears have bit into that. I wonder if it was probably empty at the time, but maybe not. Maybe somebody lost an entire can and the bear got a lesson. Have you found the bear spray to be effective at stopping charges?
Yeah, we've had to spray a few bears over the years, and obviously you and I are both firearms enthusiasts. So my personal opinion is the bear spray is the best. Well, I will back up. I'd say your head and being smart is your best first line of defense.
Yeah, I'll buy
Second,
that.
it would be bear spray, and then as a last resort, a firearm.
See, you get obviously different opinions from people, and there's some people who say absolutely not trust bear spray. It's fine if the bear is kind of curious and hanging around the edge and sort of coming in, you can dissuade him. But once he's doing a full-out charge, they claim that bear spray just does, they run right through it.
They can run right through it. I think if it's predatory and they're just looking at you as food, I think the bear spray is going to work. I think if it's a defensive charge where there's a cub, or the bear, if it's a boar, feels threatened, or there's a kill that it's guarding, I think they would run right through it.
That's when they would run. Yeah, that makes sense. I would tend to buy into that one. Yeah. So if you are out by yourself, are you going to have a handgun with you, or just a bear spray, or both, or how are you going to handle it?
Ideally, I think you would have both.
Have both.
A lot less paperwork if you spray a bear and don't have to kill it.
Yep.
And plus, it saves the bear.
Yeah.
As a pilot, I don't personally carry bear spray because it's super dangerous inside the airplane.
Yeah.
So I'll always carry my handgun, but the bear spray is in the float hatch or in a sealed container in the wheel planes, so it can't go off inside the cabin.
Yeah, sure. So what handgun do you prefer?
I've got a old Smith & Wesson 329, the alloy frame 44 mag, and it's light. I carry it all the time. I also have a Springfield XD and 10 millimeter.
That seems to be the two that people choose, you know, when you're arguing, then, well, 454, but do you go with a revolver or you go with an autoloader? Do you get more shots with one? Do you actually have time to take more shots? Maybe it, so if you had to pick between those two, which would you go with?
I like the, my day-to-day carry around here is that Springfield in 10 millimeter. It's a little more compact. It's just easier to carry. But if I'm actually going to go out and guide photographers in the field, I do carry the 44 mag. And I personally feel that you need to be able to handle the gun with your offhand, and it has to be wet. And I can't handle the recoil and hold on to with my left hand with anything bigger than a 44.
Good point.
That's where I stick with 44.
Yeah, I had heard that line, the wet and hanging onto it and controlling it. You know, I've often thought, from my experience, which is pretty minimal, I'm not a real handgunner, but it's difficult to control anything bigger than a 44.
Yep.
You know, the first time I came up here, I had, I think, a 41. And I thought, well, I'm going to pretend that barrel, you know, used to be 50-gallon drums everywhere in Alaska back in the day.
Yep.
Empty drums sit in there. I said, I'll pretend that's a grizzly bear. Let's see how many shots I can get into them. I think I hit it twice, and the rest of them went up in the sky someplace because of the recoil. You've got to really practice to learn to control that thing.
Yep.
And with a 10 millimeter autoloader, it's not quite as bad.
I agree.
Yeah. Now, somebody told me that they like the 10 millimeter for, say, guiding fishing or something, where you've got a bear coming around and he's getting interested in the fish and being problematic, and you just need to keep him away and let him know. He liked to have high capacity magazines so he could shoot in the water to dissuade that bear before he had to face any kind of a charge. Does that seem to make sense to you?
I think it makes some sense. You know, I think in an actual charge, I don't know that I would waste around, but to fire around in the gravel or in the water for a bear that hasn't made that decision to charge.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
what his point was. You know, they're not charging, but you know, they're just getting a little too bold. So you want to sort of, get out of here kind of a thing. Spray some gravel in their face, that sort of a thing. Okay. And then he liked the fact that, let's say you're doing that, and then the bear decides, I'm not going to put up with this, and he does charge. You've still got some rounds in there. You're not limited to 5 or 6. So it's a good argument there.
Yeah, and as we both know, really the most important thing is shot placement. And as our mutual friend Phil Shoemaker, he stopped a big bear in a life-threatening situation with a 9mm handgun. And it was all about him keeping his calm and shot placement.
And boy, do you have to keep your calm in a situation like that. Yeah, as I remembered, it was probably from here to the camera away. I mean, just practically in his face, but it was focused on the other people who were down in the grass underneath it. So he was able to put it right where it belongs, as I understand it. Wow. You know Phil quite well? Bumped into him quite a bit?
Phil and I have known each other for probably 45 years. We see each other once every 10 years.
Do you still go to the shows like the Safari Club and Dallas Safari Club?
Very
that kind
rarely,
of stuff?
very rarely.
You used to do it all the time though, to get clients, right?
Yep.
So now you're doing the photography clients. What do you find more fun or easier to work with, like hunting clients or photographers?
They both have their challenges. I tried to make it in my very early years as a professional photographer, and I didn't have the artistic ability. And I was trying to compare my work to people like Galen Rowell and Art Wolf, who both became friends. Art will be here in a month.
Oh yeah, he's still kicking around.
Oh yeah, Art's the nuclear-powered Energizer bunny. He just goes and goes. He's amazing.
Wow.
And at 74 years old, I think, is where Art is now.
Yeah.
So there's different challenges. I could show a photographer 1,000 bears and they're not going to be happy. If I can't get them into the right light condition, sun in the right location, and areas so that we can see a bear face on, seeing a bear from the rear and taking pictures is pretty boring. So I've got to have my guides trained to have us in the right position where the action is right and the light is right. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
But I can have a photographer be thrilled with sow and cubs and never even see a big boar, where obviously in the hunting business we're only interested in the big boars.
Sure.
So there's different challenges that way.
I think the non-photographers don't have any appreciation for that, how picky photographers are. If you want to get a really stunning picture, it's not about there's the big animal, it's about what is lighting like on that animal. Because a photographer is capturing light. It's the light reflecting off the subject. So once you've got your subject, you're just getting started. Now you've got to get in the right position, the right angle, and then they have to make the right moves to make an interesting picture. Like you said, a bear bent over, sticking its nose in the ground, big deal. Yeah, that's a challenge, all right. You figure that's part of your obligation? You don't just say, okay, guys, I've taken you out here, there's your bear. It's your problem if you can't get a good picture.
No, that's why I spend a lot of time with my guides and myself in the field, teaching the guides not just all the safety aspects and getting close to bears, but how to position your photographers to get that right shot, and then learning the bear language, the body language, knowing when they're going to charge after a fish, and being able to give the photographers warning, okay, that bear's about ready to charge any second, and then they can be ready on the shutter.
Now you and or your guides who are with the photographers have to have bear spray and or a gun, or both? I
require all my guides, after they've passed a firearms course that I run, I've got steel targets in the back here, to carry both a handgun and the bear spray. And what I tell them is your head, your brain is your first line of defense, second is the bear spray, and I don't want somebody to actually ever shoot a bear unless it's making physical contact. That's the time then we know the bear spray's not worked. And we're operating in the park, so there's some legal ramifications.
Oh, I'd imagine, yeah. But you can be armed to protect in the park, but you better have a puncture wound or something on you to prove it.
Exactly.
Yeah, defense of life and property, but probably not property, just life.
Right.
Yeah, I can see that. Had you ever had to do it?
Not had to put a bullet in them, but we have bear sprayed maybe in the last 30 years, half a dozen bears.
Only half a dozen? And how often are you, gosh, that's a pretty good ratio. I mean, you must be getting into bears how many days a week?
5-6 days a week. We're on an average 6-day trip. We're showing people 40 to 50 different bears.
Now, these are mostly brown bears, coastal.
Correct, coastal
And
brown bears.
is it true that they're not nearly as aggressive as the interior bears?
Yeah, they've got so much food source, and this time of year they're into the sedge grasses and clamming, and so they've got good food source. Early July, the fish come in, and they'll eat fish all the way to the end of October, or at least mid-October. And so I believe some of these bears will never even eat a mammal in their life. They've got so much fish and the marine life, there's no need for it. It's easy, and they're way more chilled.
Yeah.
And being 30, 40 yards from a bear, walking right by us is not uncommon. We don't approach the bears closer than 50, but sometimes they'll walk by 10 yards away.
Yeah. Yeah, Betsy and I have been up here. In fact, we were not too far from here on one of the smaller streams coming into the lake. And we had bears fishing on the other side of the stream. You know, a sow with 2 cubs, I think it was, and she'd go up to the falls and they'd catch a fish or something, and then they'd come back down. We are on the other side, fly rodding and catching our fish, and we all got along just fine. They showed no aggression whatsoever. Now, we did have a guide with us who had, I think he had an 870 12-gauge slug gun kind of thing. Seems to be pretty common with the fishing guides.
Yep.
And another time we were down, probably on the Mulchatna, and we had one try to come in the boat. You know, it came up behind us. We were out there casting and looked back, went, uh-oh. But it was a young one, you know, and it was curious, and you could tell it thought maybe I can get some fish out of that boat. We were able to just haze it away. But yeah, that's pretty amazing, because so many people are so worried about bears when they come up here. They're always wondering what cartridge should I load up and which handgun should I have and all the rest of it. And actually your odds are really pretty good for never having to use any of that stuff.
Yep.
Something worth remembering.
Yep. Yeah, we're in the bear country, actually taking pictures of bears 120 days a season.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of time. When you take people out, how many hours are they out there?
Usually 7 to 8 hours
7 to 8
in the
hour
field
day.
every day.
Do you go early, or you find it's better when it's late? I know as a photographer, you want your light to be low.
You like early and late light.
Early and late light, yeah.
So when we're on the coast, we have to time it by the tides.
Ah,
So
okay.
we try to get either early light or late light. So sometimes we'll be leaving at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes we won't leave till noon, so we can get that later light and still catch the right tide.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky business, but I'm sure you know it. Jerry, if you have some advice for anyone wanting to come up here, whether they're going on a hunt or just a camping trip, they want to see Alaska, what should they worry about with bears?
Keeping a clean camp if you're camping. Don't cook in your tent that you're sleeping in. Pretty much the common sense stuff. That's going to keep you out of the problem. You know, a firearm, bear spray is definitely worth having, but train with them. You know,
Yeah, you really need to know how
gotta
to use
train
it.
with it.
Yeah, automatic. And it has to be accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah, just
Yep.
have it in the back of your pack's not going to work. So many guys will write in and say, "Oh, I wouldn't go into bear country without anything less than a 500 Smith & Wesson with a 10-inch barrel or an 870 or some sort of a 12-gauge slug thing." And I say, yeah, that's great for having it there and ready when the bear's in your face, but how do you get it there?
Exactly.
Nobody's going fishing with his 870 in his hands ready to shoot a bear.
Yep.
So you've got to be practical about this stuff, huh?
Exactly. I would much rather have my .416 in my hand if I had to shoot a bear in self-defense.
Yeah.
But as Colonel Cooper used to say, the first rule of a gunfight is have a gun. And if you don't have the handgun that's quickly accessible, it doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, and when that's the experience Phil had. He's got a little 9mm, but he had it.
Right.
Yeah, he had a 444 or 454 Casull probably back at the cabin, but it's like me, I would say, I'm tired of lugging this big thing around. I'm just going to walk down to the creek for a quick
Exactly.
little fish, and
Yep.
I don't really need it, and then you did need it.
Yep.
So it does have to be something that you will have with you all the time. How big are these bear sprays? It's been years since I packed one around, but it seems to me like a decent one was about yay tall, 2 inches around perhaps.
Yeah. Yep.
Good enough for a one bear encounter? Or?
Yep. And they have about a 2.5 second. They empty that bear spray very quickly. And just like with a firearm, I'd recommend getting a couple extra cans of bear spray and actually going and finding a target and seeing what it does. It
Actually
comes out
shoot it.
quicker than you think,
It's done.
and it doesn't go as far as you might think.
Ah, And the wind is a big problem.
You know, the wind is a problem, but if the bear is coming downwind and into me, I don't care. I'm going to get oversprayed with that bear spray, but it's better than getting chewed on.
Yeah.
But you've got to wait till it's 10, 15 feet away.
Yeah, if you shoot too soon, he's not even there yet, and the spray drifts off to the side or back at you, and it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
That might be what's going on when people say that bear spray doesn't work, because I've tried it. Maybe that bear spray never actually got to the bear.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well,
There's one bear that I personally sprayed with a full-on face full of spray. It stopped, went up onto its legs, shook itself, rolled over onto its back, just was shaking, got up, and off it went.
Wow.
And it was gone.
So it worked.
Yeah.
And I would believe it would have to, because you think of the sensitivity of the nose of this bear. If he is able to smell that meat from 14 miles away and trail it in, and he gets some hot pepper in those sensitive nose, oofda, it's got to be effective.
Well, last year here at the lodge, we were doing training with my guides, and we used a can of bear spray. There was this very light breeze blowing, and none of us really thought about it. I mean, it was like half a mile an hour. And about 5 minutes later, I'm still doing the lecture, and we're talking about in the bear spray, and we're all starting to cough, and our eyes are starting to water just from that lingering little bit. So it's powerful stuff.
Yeah,
and
capsaicin, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, powerful stuff. Well, listen, we probably have to run here, but I want to really thank you for visiting with us. It's always fascinating to visit with someone who's been there, done that, and to think of a lifetime in Alaska. How old are you now?
68.
68. You've been here since you were 17, and you almost didn't make the first year.
Almost didn't make it. If it hadn't been for the Jensen family adopting me, I wouldn't have made it.
That's pretty remarkable. So if you guys are looking for a wild adventure, whether you're a young man or a young woman, if you really have a yearning to come to Alaska, what would you recommend they do, Jerry?
There are a lot of great outfitters up here. Start writing some letters around Thanksgiving time, because that's when the hiring usually takes place. Thanksgiving to the first of the year is when we finish hiring our guides. Tulare Creek Lodge is another great operation. You know, spend your time in the woods, learn your basics, and then start sending emails or phone calls to some of the great outfitters and get in as an apprentice.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. I've met a lot of young men and women who have done that. Some of them are guides, some of them are pilots. You know, some of them just did it for a year or two and they were finished, but others make a life career of it like you did.
Yep.
And it's what a wild adventure to think in this day and age when so many people are so urbanized and so locked into the cities that you can still come to a place like this and live with nature and actually make a living and enjoy an exciting life and survive a few bear attacks. Something to shoot for, guys. I would highly recommend it. I kind of regret it myself. When I was a young man, I came up here intending to do that, and then I got a phone call inviting me down for a job. That was a pretty good offer, and I hemmed and hawed, and I finally went down for that job, but can't complain too much. I've had a pretty good career myself, but there's an opportunity up here. So, Jerry, you're currently flying for your own lodge and some others?
Yes.
And one of them is one we are hunting out of right now, which is Bushwhack Adventures Alaska.
Yep.
They have operations, I guess, down in Arizona as well. But
Right. That's Tim Winslow and Kip Flukes.
Yes, those are
both
the two gentlemen.
great guys. They run just an amazingly great operation. So I'm actually very privileged to kind of manage their flight side of things for them.
Cool. Well, we will look forward to flying with you once again here soon. We're going to head out to the tundra wilderness and see if we can't engage a bear and without him engaging us. Hey, we want to thank you all for listening in, and we certainly thank Jerry Jacques up in Alaska. If you guys want to meet some real characters, come to Alaska and just start talking to folks, because they might look kind of ordinary like Jerry here, but boy, do they have a life story behind them. A lot of experience in God's country.
Yep.
So thanks for listening in. We'll see you all next time. Hunt honest and shoot straight, even if it's just with bear spray.